Hello, friends. Welcome to the Logistics of Logistics podcast. My name is Joe Lynch. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's topic is the container payment portal and the rise of AI in freight with my friend Jake Hoffman. How's it going, Jake?
It's great, Joe. Glad to be back.
Thank you so much, Jake. Always a pleasure to talk to you. So, Jake, please introduce yourself and your company and where you're calling from today.
My name is Jake Hoffman. I'm the CTO here at Gnosis Freight. Gnosis Freight is a software company focused on the Container Lifecycle Management is the phrase that we use to describe what we do. And that was the title of the last podcast we did together. Really, Gnosis focuses on everything around international containers or any container really of moving freight around the world. We're all based in Charleston, South Carolina, is where our headquarters is and all of our employees are. We all come to the office every day here in Charleston, South Carolina, and we serve BCOs, the receiver of goods in any of those international container transactions, ocean carriers, terminals, drayage carriers, brokers, freight forwarders, really the entire gambit of the international container world.
Yep. When you say BCO, I always like to clarify on that. So that's the benevolent cargo owner, right?
Beneficial cargo owner. Yeah, that's right.
And are they just the importer of record? Because normally, like if we're talking about domestic freight, there's a shipper and there's a receiver.
You can think of, and that's a good way to put it because we serve both importers and exporters. And so people in the US that'd be sending a container somewhere else as we can serve the exporter. It's like a totally different problem set and software solution. But for the most part, you can think of a BCO in that regard as the receiver, as the person, the Amazon, Walmart, Target, of Home Depots of the world that are bringing a container from somewhere else into the United States.
So one more time, what is the problem that Gnosis is solving for their customers?
So it originally was just for that BCO, and the problem was the coordination of international freight, understanding where the containers were, what the status of those containers were, what's inside of it, and then how to execute on that, how to make sure trucks go pick up containers on time and deliver it to warehouses on time, and you coordinate that entire inventory around the world. But in doing that, we've also broadened our scope to work with everybody else because we had to make the data model really good for the container to track the container and give statuses and ETAs and everything else. And then that kind of broadened our scope to where we work with everyone now. And we've taken that same data model and applied it to ocean carriers, terminals, freight forwarders, drayage carriers, and everybody else.
Yep. Jake, you told me before we hit the record button that you guys saw a tremendous uptick in business during COVID because suddenly the world realized we have a real problem with visibility in the ports. And if you did have visibility, it was, I see my container is at sea for the last 6 weeks.
Sure. Yeah. And that's where COVID was a really interesting time. As Austin, our CEO, started the company in 2017. I joined in 2018 and we were building some products and doing some consulting and that kind of stuff. But then in 2020, when we really finally had a product and we started putting it out to market, the entire world changed, as we've talked about before, and everyone in international freight knows. There was a totally different problem set where you couldn't just get the vessel ETA off the ocean carrier website anymore. It mattered that the ETA to Los Angeles was 2 weeks ago, and that vessel is still sitting off the coast. And so for us to be able to tap into the data sources at the individual terminal operators to understand when vessels are going to berth, when containers are going to be unloaded, and all these other kind of things was a totally different thing than anybody had ever experienced before. And we used that data set and then our software on top of it, just being able to filter containers by status, understand when demurrage last 3 days were, when containers are available and everything else, and surface all the exceptions to our customers. We helped them save tons of money and kind of take control in a time that was super chaotic.
Yep. One of our conversations, again, before we hit record, was when we think about visibility, we had been revolution domestically with Project 44 and Four Kites and MacroPoint and many other solutions. And we all of a sudden could see my truck moving from Los Angeles to New York. And I had many years ago, I used to say we have real-time visibility when I was using EDI. It was not real time, but we said it because I think it was the most real time we could get. Now on domestically, we found out we have real time. But as soon as we had that domestic visibility, the whole world looked and said, what about the ocean? What about the port? And the port was, and not so much anymore, but was a black hole when it came to visibility. I didn't know anything. It was like someone would say, yeah, it cleared customs. And then demurrage and detention, especially during COVID, people started getting charged for all that. And it was like, how am I charged for? I can't even pick it up. And we'll get into that. That's where we got the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And we'll talk about that. But that was one of the reasons it started, is because I can't pick up my container, yet I'm being fined for it sitting there.
That's right. And Joe, every time I try to describe to somebody that's not in the industry and doesn't understand all the problems that you do and a lot of the listeners of your podcast do, is the reason it's so difficult is because it's so large. And there's people that have done a better job than me of explaining why that's the case. But you think is when a container moves from the very beginning of the supply chain all the way to a warehouse, and we'll just use the example of going into the US, there's a terminal operator in China or Vietnam or wherever it starts. And there's an ocean carrier that might own the ship that they're putting the container on, and they might not. And then there's a terminal, and then sometimes there's a rail carrier. And so the container is changing hands so many times because it has to, because of the just magnitude of how large the world is and how much money and capital and infrastructure it takes to move everything around, that they all have their own systems, they're all optimizing for that local maxima, and no one's really looking at the entire global supply chain and trying to optimize those things together, except for software companies, people like us that kind of take data from all these different places and put it into one pane of glass for people to understand what's really going on.
Right. And over the road transportation, which all of us can understand. And by the way, I always say it is simple, not easy. So it's just, hey, doing 100 push-ups every morning. Simple, do it, right?
Oh yeah,
Not easy.
I'm in no way saying that the domestic
Right.
transportation piece is easy.
No, but the thing is, it is relatively simple compared to freight forwarding. And I think if you look at domestic shipping, it might be a shipper, there's a receiver, their trucking company, and maybe a freight broker. And they're all potentially in the same time zone, if not in the same time zone, no more than two or three time zones away. They all speak English. They all use the same currency. They're all in the same country. When we talk about freight forwarding, there's, I think, 13, 14, 15 people involved, different time zones, different cultures, different business locations and legalities. And I've worked a lot in Asia in the past. And when I always tell people, the 12-hour time difference is just the beginning. Like the cultural differences, the language differences, different laws, different everything. And these handoffs are incredibly difficult. This is where the problem in supply chain is handoffs.
That's right. Yeah. And you mentioned the 13, 14, 15. That's the people that are actually involved in influencing the movement of that freight. Don't even start to talk about all the stakeholders of understanding where it is. You'll have a buyer at a large company that needs to know where their freight is. So they're another party that talks to the supply chain team. There's you and me that are the guys that ordered this couch 6 weeks ago, and we're excited for it to come to our house. There's the trucking company that might be the domestic trucking company that's waiting on that to get delivered to a warehouse so they can pick it up. There's all these other people that aren't even involved in just moving the freight that have some kind of stake in it, that need visibility and to understand what's going on with it.
Yep. So Jake, tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Some career highlights before you joined the mothership that is Gnosis. And why did you join Gnosis?
So I studied chemical engineering at Auburn University, and that's where I actually met our CEO and founder, Austin McCombs. I met him at Auburn. He was studying supply chain and data science, and I was doing chemical engineering. We were friends and had some similar intellectual interests and things, but we stayed in touch after school. I thought I wanted to be in oil and gas. I moved to Houston, Texas, and worked in oil pipelines and did some work at some of the oil pipelines. And then at breweries, I did some work at Anheuser-Busch for a little while. And the part that I was super interested in always came back to the computer part. So I was programming the giant machine, the pumps that would pump oil 50 miles in the middle of nowhere, or the machines that would tell you how to mix together all the ingredients to make Budweiser or Bud Light and then those kind of things. And I liked the computers that controlled that. And so I was debating going back to school, and I talked to Austin, our CEO, to understand what he was doing, because I remembered he was someone that I thought was super smart and was in this just the computer space, the programming space. And I actually talked to him, and I ended up going back to Georgia Tech and getting my master's, because I thought I wanted to be a stock trader, a quant trader, and write code to trade stocks and those kind of things. And then he convinced me to come to Charleston, South Carolina for a summer and see the kind of stuff he was working on in international freight. and I fell in love with it. And like all the rest of us that are in this international freight industry, you fall into it somehow and then you never leave, and you become obsessed with containers and trucks and everything else moving stuff around the world.
Nice. I remember you telling me that when you first met with Austin, you guys just had a whole bunch of sticky notes that you were putting up on the wall, and you realized the tremendous complexity of this business. And I think anytime you're looking at a physical supply chain, you also are looking and saying, what data points we have? Because that's what we're always trying to do, is connect the physical world to the digital world. And we throw around those terms, digital twins, but it begins with understanding that flow, that is not easy. And then the next thing is, where do I actually get data? And that's not been easy.
That's right. And just because you brought it up, I have to. One of my favorite stories to tell is whenever I convinced my wife to move to Charleston and work on Gnosis with Austin. And this is a compliment to my wife for somehow agreeing to that and agreeing to let me come and work on this. She came into our office when it was just me and Austin, and we had sticky notes all over the wall and just a fold up table. And she pulled me to the side and said, "We moved to Charleston for this? This is why we're here?" I thought this was a tech company. And I was like, "Oh yeah, we're getting there. We're working on it." But it was, and that's where doing that stuff with Austin at the very beginning, and people don't really know that Austin actually worked at a freight forwarder and did the process of being an operator to understand how this all works, to understand that you got to coordinate the ocean carrier with the trucker and when a container is available. And then you got to send this invoice to this person and all that. And Austin started there and taught me. And then we just started doing some consulting and programming to automate these tasks. And over a million iterations later, Gnosis is where it is now.
Yep. And Charleston is absolutely beautiful city. And I know you guys have grown a lot. And I know everybody is living in Charleston, which is rare these days, because a lot of people, a lot of companies are fully remote, and that works well for them. But it is, you lose a little something when you're not all in the same place. And I think whatever you guys are doing, it's working. So
yeah, it's the benefits we see from having the ability to, right outside my office right here is our entire dev team, is our back end and front end developers that I can go bother them and see what they're working on. And they can ask questions to the guys next to them to get that kind of domain expertise that's necessary to quickly iterate in the space we're in. So it's great, and it works fantastic for us. And we've really doubled down on all being in person. I don't think that'll be the forever case. I think that being a company that operates in all corners of the earth, when we have customers in Australia, all across Europe, we obviously interact super closely with Asia and all the people there. And so I don't think the forever state of Gnosis is to all be in the same office in Charleston, South Carolina, but we're just trying to keep the magic here as long as we can. And we're at about 70 people now, so we'll see how long we can do that.
yeah, Charleston's also a beautiful city. I think it's the most historic city in America.
I think so. And it's definitely a recruiting tool when we get people to come visit in person for an interview. Just like Austin got me those many years ago, we get them to see how beautiful the city is and be on the water and everything else. It definitely helps get them here.
We're talking on May 15th, so it's not unbearably hot.
Not yet.
Another 2 months. It's a little too hot down there, but it never gets too cold, so life is good. So anyway, I want to talk to you about we wrote down 4 things for the record button, but the first thing I want to talk about is this container payment portal. Please tell me what that is.
So Gnosis has always served the BCO. And that's, I talked at the beginning of the podcast about who our customers are and what we do. And a core tenet of Gnosis has always been to help the BCO, that beneficial cargo owner, that importer or exporter, the shipper, the receiver, either one in those transactions, to understand international freight, where their containers are and where everything is moving. And then what are they getting charged for along the way? Are they being charged demurrage or per diem or detention, or what is their ocean freight charges and all these things and so on? A huge part of that was this big complexity in demurrage calculation. When is a container actually available at a terminal? Are the gates open? Is there an appointment available? And we approached it a couple of years ago from the perspective of almost auditing, of saying, hey, this container, we got charged demurrage on this day, but the terminal actually wasn't open. And so we help our BCOs and customers understand that. OSRA regulations come along and make it a law that ocean carriers have to include in their demurrage invoices certain data elements, container availability date being the most notable one there. And then also that they legally cannot charge for demurrage if you can't pick up the container. And so where it's the standard tariff and contracts are X dollars per day, and maybe on Saturday it's $500 and then it's $100 a day. And then on Sunday they decide to charge another $100 and the terminal is closed, that no longer is an option. And there's now laws in place that prevent that.
Jake, please give us a definition of demurrage versus detention.
Sure. Sorry. Demurrage being when a container is no longer under the control, quote unquote, of an ocean carrier. The most common time this being at an ocean terminal. And so if a container is booked from port to port, say it starts in Shanghai and it comes to Los Angeles, and then in Los Angeles, as the BCO, I'm responsible for sending a trucker to pick up that container. If I leave the container at that terminal for too long, then I'm going to be charged demurrage.
So I get some free time though, right?
You get, most of the time you'll get 3 or 4 days for that container to be at the terminal before you pick it up, that it's totally free. And then every day thereafter, when it sits at that terminal, you get charged a certain amount of money. And most of the time it's $200 a day for 3 days. And then the next 3 days is $300. And then it goes up after that.
And everybody's got a slightly different deal. So if I'm Costco or Walmart, I might have a much better deal than a smaller company.
That's right. The example I used when we were talking earlier is Joe Lynch's container. So
right.
Joe Lynch shipping a container probably doesn't get the same amount of free time that a Walmart or an Amazon or somebody does.
So that's the demurrage. What is the detention?
So detention, and I always make the caveat, detention or per diem, either one of those interchangeably, because I know on the domestic side of trucking, detention means something totally different. It means when the truck has to wait too long at an unloading facility or something. But for international, and when we're talking about containers, detention or per diem means once you get a truck to pick it up and you're coming to deliver it to your warehouse or deliver it wherever it needs to go and get it unloaded, you have a certain amount of time that you can keep that container before you got to return it so that they can use it for somebody else. And so when you're taking their equipment and you have it out to be unloaded and those kind of things, they need it back because that's a part of their operational infrastructure. And so if you keep it out too long, then they're going to start charging you money for that.
So in some regards, the demurrage is rent, so to speak, on the physical space at the port, because the port is a big place, but they don't want your stuff sitting there. And the detention relates more to the container. Somebody owns that container and they want it moving efficiently across. They want to keep it moving. It's like a truck, right? They want to keep it moving and full.
Exactly. That's right.
So what we had during COVID and was so much talk of detention and demurrage, and we had a lot of companies being charged demurrage and detention, but yet they couldn't go pick it up. So they said, I had my drayage guy go over there. They can't pick it up. And so there was a whole lot of bad blood. And I remember hearing some people say the container's not even worth picking up at this point because we owe so much money on it. And I won't mention the name of the company, but think of one of the very largest logistics companies in the world, and I'm domestic here. A friend of a friend said, hey, I need you to talk to this guy. I think you can help him. And so he called me and I was like, yeah, what can I do for you? He goes, I'm wondering if you know anything about like warehouse space near Long Beach or LA. I go, me personally, I know some people, but that's not my business. I don't know. And he goes, people, just let me know. And I was thinking, this is like one of the largest logistics companies in the world calling me to say, do I have warehouse space? And I was thinking how crazy that got. Because of all the problems we experienced at COVID, the detention and demurrage, the Federal Maritime Commission talked to some people, a lot of people, and they came up with the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. To tell us what that was.
So the impacts of that, and it's a law put into place to, one, say how ocean carriers are allowed to charge and the regulations around who they charge and such on demurrage and detention, mainly being that they have to charge the actual BCO. So on the invoice is listed as it goes to the BCO. Instead of being the trucker that's picking up a container or any of those kind of things, it's going to the BCO. And then there's all these data elements that are required in the invoice. Things like the vessel the container was on, the date that it unloaded from a ship, And there's all these elements of what happens there. Container availability date being one that was the most important probably in that, which is the first time that a truck could pick up a container. So they put all that in place. And then they also had a part of it that says you can't charge demurrage whenever a container is not available. So if it goes into the bottom of a stack, or there's no appointment available, or the gates are closed because it's Sunday and no one's working on Sunday, then previously there had been a lot of the ways that these tariffs and the charges and contracts worked was if it charges start on Thursday, then they're going to charge you for every day until the next Thursday, no matter when the terminal's open or anything in between. And so there's laws now that by OSRA 22 put into place that don't allow for that to happen. It's super granular in saying that you're only allowed to charge for certain days. You're only allowed to, when you invoice, there's all these parameters required for an invoice and all those things combined.
Yep. So that when you say OSRA, that's Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022.
Correct. Yes.
And back to your point, during COVID, somebody would send a drayage company to go pick up freight. They might be waiting in a line that's 24 hours long. And then somebody, meanwhile, is charging you for that day. And then also they might get into the port facility and find out, oh yeah, that my container has 60 other containers stacked on it. And this was the problem the port ran into, is they had a backup. They had so much containers coming in and running out of containers. And then it was a little bit of mayhem. And that was an enormous amount of freight. I think the good news about what happened during COVID is it did force us to confront what happens when we have a tremendous amount of volume like we had. And also there was some capacity that was off the market because of COVID. And I think we needed this. So the Federal Maritime Commission, they want us to have a great market. They want us to be able to trade with the rest of the world. And they want to make sure that those ports do not become bottlenecks. They want to make sure that everybody's being treated fairly. That's why we have this OSRA. Again, that's Ocean Shipping Reform Act 2022. And by the way, I will put a link to another episode I did. I interviewed Lauren Began about, our friend Lauren. I interviewed Lauren about OSRA 2022 in 2022. So I'll put a link to that episode. Anyway, so you guys have been working on helping companies be compliant to OSRA 2022. Please talk about that.
So the container payment portal is the product, and I know we're putting that in the title of this episode, and it's something I definitely wanted to talk about. That's the title of the product that we've developed in partnership with PayCargo. So PayCargo, large international freight payment provider, payment network, where they have both the vendor and the payer side of the entire payment network, and they facilitate payments across the ecosystem for international freight, for air and for ocean. But so for us, they are the payment rails facilitating payments between different parties. And then we are the calculation engine and the interface for people to see containers and understand what's going on. And so we announced the container payment portal with Hapag-Lloyd as our first ocean carrier customer.
Not too shabby.
We announced that at TPM this past year, which was super exciting. And they're our first ocean carrier customer that we're rolling that out across the country. I think it'll start, I believe, in July is when the first rollout, and we go into Houston first and then roll out to different ports across the country, and eventually it'll be everywhere. So any container coming into the United States for Hapag-Lloyd, this system will be the source of truth for demurrage collection and calculation and container availability and everything else. But then since then, that rollout is soon to come along. Since then, we currently are live in Los Angeles at the TrayPac terminal with Zim as the ocean carrier. And so Zim has a service where they're sending vessels into TrayPac, and our system is live there, calculating demurrage, controlling last free day container availability and everything else for those containers there. And it's the first digital implementation of OSRA is one way to put it. And so when ocean carriers come to us, why Hapag-Lloyd came to us and PayCargo together was because of, in order to comply with OSRA, there's all these data elements you have to collect from all these different places. It's not just to take the 4 data elements out of Hapag-Lloyd's system and put it on an invoice. You got to understand what's happening at the terminal. You got to understand the gate schedules of when the terminal is actually open and when it's not. You got to be able to identify when things out of the ordinary happen. I think I told you one of the first places we were testing was Houston. And in Houston, there was a snowstorm in January, which never happens.
That doesn't happen. Yeah.
So it wasn't on the schedule that the terminal was going to be closed on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, but the snowstorm happened. And so we have to identify that and not include those days in calculations because truckers couldn't go pick up containers. And so that's where this system has been developed to comply with OSRA and then also to provide that full digital form of transparency of how these calculations happen. When are you being charged? When are you not? A full auditable trail. And that's great from a legal perspective for the ocean carrier. And then it's great for them from a dispute perspective, because before this is implemented, there's entire teams of people whose entire job is to recognize, hey, this trucker's saying they couldn't pick up the container because of this happened, so they couldn't be charged demurrage. And it's teams and teams of people that are handling all these things manually. And so it's a giant digital coordination effort to put all these data sources together, do the calculation appropriately, and control the flow of that container through the port.
Yes. And again, we during COVID felt like the port became a little bit of a black hole. We just didn't have the visibility that we were used to. And we never had a lot of visibility really into the last 5, 7, 10 years. But even that was like, okay, your container cleared customs. But it wasn't like, and then it was ready to pick up. We didn't get nearly what we're getting today. And that's because companies like yours have stepped into this space and turned a black hole into basically a rich part of data that we didn't have before. It's a gold mine of data.
That's right. And I mentioned a little bit ago, and I don't really fault the terminals themselves. The terminals have their own operating systems. They're moving containers at such a fast pace and taking in vessels and doing all these things. It's just the coordination effort between whatever they have, whatever the ocean carrier has, whatever the truckers have, and everybody else, is it takes a third party to put all these things together for it to really work.
Yeah. And I think anybody who's working on the data side, who's visited the physical side, recognizes your job's a little easier than theirs.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I might have even told you the story the last time you and I talked. I am fascinated by the terminals. I think doing port tours here in Charleston, which we've done several times, is one of my favorite days. We hire an engineer that studied computer science, and we take him to a container terminal, the Wando Welch terminal in Charleston, and their eyes light up like, what in the world? Because for us, it's a row in a spreadsheet or a row in a database of this container. But then you realize how big it is, and these ships are huge, and there's people going everywhere. So it's really cool to see that.
Yep. I want to talk more about where you get your inputs in a minute. But next, I want to talk to you about AI. How are you guys using AI?
That's right. And I'm glad you asked. And I think it's something that in the industry, there's buzzwords everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You and I were both at Manifest, and the amount of times that they said AI on a panel, or a new company was introduced that does AI this or AI that. And and I think it's everywhere for good reason. Have been the biggest swim against the grain, or if everybody's talking about AI, then it's overblown and we don't need to hype it and those kind of things. Austin, our CEO, was super convicted that there is a real use case that we need to lean into. And I've been the biggest AI proponent ever, probably since Manifest, and just working with our team. But the way we do it, I think, is a little bit unique, and where you don't communicate it. It's not there to, maybe it will at some point. It's not to make predictions better or take over the jobs of the VP of supply chain and the global logistics director or the inbound transportation manager. The thing that we use it the most for, and you and I related on this earlier, is the translation of all this information that lives in the periphery of moving a container. So things that live in emails and spreadsheets and text messages and
PDFs,
WhatsApp and PDFs, commercial invoices, packing lists, all the information that lives there, it's there, but you can't do anything with it. The information exists, but it's not in a database. It's not structured. Yeah. And you call it static data, Joe. And I know I've heard you say that before, and we call it unstructured. So the way that we use AI is to translate what exists in the unstructured world that's in the parallel to moving a container and make it structured so that you can do stuff with it.
So what you're telling me, Jake, is that you believe that AI has to start at the bottom of the corporate ladder. It's going to be a clerk for a few years before you promote it to anything else.
Correct. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's a pretty high performer. So maybe a couple of years is a little long, but we'll see. But it is. That's where we see the most benefit. And there's a couple of different things. Is great use cases. And the example I told you about earlier, pickup numbers. So we work with a lot of BCOs, large shippers that move containers on the rail. And the ocean carrier is the customer that moves the container on the rail for our customer. And there's this kind of hierarchy that happens where a pickup number is the piece of information you need to be able to go pick up a container from a rail yard. Well, the rail carrier gives that to the ocean carrier. And the ocean carrier makes sure that they have all their ducks in a row, that it's cleared customs and other things before they give that pickup number to the BCO or the shipper. And then the shipper picks their trucker they're going to go get to pick it up, and then they give it to the trucker. So you see this hierarchy that happens where there's 4 layers of sending an email with a pickup number or something else.
That sequence has to happen that way, though.
It has to. Yes, you're right. Because of security, because of all these other who's the customer. And there's not really a better system. You could have a perfect API that all these people are synced up to. In order to do that, everybody has to play ball. Anyway, long story short, you're right, Joe. That's the way that it has to work. And the reason that it can be such a problem is because when a container gets to a rail yard, sometimes you only have 24 hours of free time. We talked about demurrage and at the port in Los Angeles and Charleston and places where you might have 4, 5 days, whatever it is. At a rail yard, you might have 1. And so in order to get those layers of communication down and be able to get that pickup number to the trucker that's actually going to pick it up, it takes a little time. And it's something that it's not structured data by nature, but it's super important and timely. And so what we've done is we literally just work with our customers. We have an AI agent that is an email inbox that gets tagged in the email that gets to the BCO after it comes from the ocean carrier. And as soon as that email gets sent, we parse it, we put it in our database, we send the electronic delivery order to the drayage carrier with all the information they need. And so instead of it being a manual email unstructured process, it becomes immediate data that people can use and take action on.
Yep. Yeah, this is the future of using AI and stuff like this, because I feel like there's so many places. And I described a situation that I knew of. One of my daughters was working in procurement, and she said, I get a ton of emails every day, and I have to look them over, put them in a system and approve them. And I was like, why don't the people making the request do it? And she said, yeah, that would make sense, but we're not doing it that way. Now you can use some sort of agent to say, take every one of these emails, which are unstructured, pull out the critical elements, put it into my system so I don't have to do that kind of work. And I think we're seeing this kind of across the board. I do think initially when people said AI is here and it's going to wipe out this, that, the other thing, and I think what it's really going to wipe out is a lot of the busy work initially. And I think it's going to get better and better. And over time, we're going to find out what else it takes away. But it's not a human, so it's going to do the non-human work a lot better than we can. Probably be a while before they can be better humans than us.
That's right. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of things. Michael, our CRO, always says there's things that computers are good at doing. There's things that humans are good at doing. And all we're trying to do is we're trying to take away from the inbound logistics manager or the logistics analyst, wherever it is, the stuff that should be done by a computer, which is to take data from point A and put it into point B. If there's ever a time where someone is opening a PDF and looking at information and then typing it into another system, that's a perfect use case for AI, for automation, for any of the things that we've talked about.
Yep. I love it. So another thing I want to talk to you about is, these are, I guess I'll make them 2 separate topics, but there's a lot of overlap. Security and governmental input. So I know you guys are working closely with the government, and because first off, there's the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, or OSRA or OSRA, whatever you want to call it, 2022, and that compliance. So you guys are working with the federal government on that. And there's other things that are emerging threats. So please talk about your involvement with the feds.
Sure. Yeah. So I think we developed the container payment portal that we talked about with the FMC and OSRA 22 in mind. And so
FMC's Federal Maritime Commission?
Yes, correct. Sorry. Yeah. So the Federal Maritime Commission, when they put OSRA 22 into place, and then like I talked about the container payment portal, taking all the data elements in and matching the regulations they put into place. When we were at TPM this past year, and then in several meetings following up, we've showed the FMC our solution to work with them and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Hapag-Lloyd is our first customer that kind of put this initiative on themselves that they wanted to be FMC compliant and do OSRA 22 compliant and do these things, and presented it to them. And we said, what do you guys think? Is this good? Does this fit what you were looking for? And the communication back was very positive. I was like, this is they recognize that their job that they want to do is to put regulation in place to then foster technology and innovation in the sector and in the industry. And so our solution coming to market with that is a way that we can take the guardrails they put into place and then act on it and provide a solution that kind of matches those things.
Yes, there's not always an easy way to comply when there's a new Fed reg. I'm from automotive, and I always remember we worked with federal government on the Fed regs, and sometimes they'd say, this is the new Fed reg. So the electric vehicles was one where it was like they basically said, we're going to say these are 100 miles per gallon. So it was good for CAFE. That's the corporate average fuel economy.
Yeah.
And they just pulled that out of thin air. But also, the Food Safety Modernization Act said, you must do these things. I've read over that extensively because I did a lot of training for people. And there was parts of it where I was like, I don't know how we comply with this as an industry, the trucking industry, because it says, I want to track the temperature on the product and on the pallet, not in the truck. You're like, ooh, like we're talking to a lot of sensors there. And so there's a little bit of give and take, but I think it's important for the leaders in the space to be working with Federal Maritime Commission in this case to say, hey, this is doable. It's not doable. Change the law. But you guys are saying we can help companies become OSRA compliant.
That's right. Yeah. And it's one of those, hey, it's possible, like you said, and it wasn't easy. Right? It's like it took work to get there because of what we talked about, because bridging the gap between all these different places, the legislation at its core, it means well, and it wants to prevent unfair practices and make it make sense. And so it does.
Like you said, guardrails. So that's what the FMC needs this to be an efficient market.
Exactly. Yeah. And so they're not there to do the data work and do these things and make people do a certain thing. And then where we tried to bridge the gap is, Mr. Terminal Operator, you guys don't need to change what you're doing. We just need you to tell us these core data elements, the stuff that you already have. Ocean carrier, we need you to just give us the information you have, and we'll do all the work in between to make sure that our calculations and the logic and everything lines up with what the FMC is envisioning.
Yep. Very important. Very important. So one last thing I want to talk to you about is security. I want to talk about there's two pieces of this. So there's cybersecurity. Obviously, that is critically important, but also cargo security. We have a tremendous cargo theft problem. So let's talk first about cybersecurity. I've said on many times on my podcast, I'm like a broken record, that I think we're headed for a digital 9/11, a cyber 9/11, where we get hacked, and it'll no doubt be a wake-up call for anybody who has systems that aren't quite up to snuff. Talk about what you guys are doing when it comes to cybersecurity.
Sure. So I'll speak in two kind of lenses. One, just privately at Gnosis, what we do and how we think about that and when we work with companies and such. And then second, you mentioned us talking to the government and those kind of things. And Adam Baker, who's our VP of Government Affairs, one of the things that he talks with the U.S. government and other parties about is just our security as a nation and how do the infrastructure at ports and terminals and all those kind of things. And Adam has done a great job on our team of spearheading that to work with other stakeholders in the United States to make sure that we have a strong and resilient supply chain and infrastructure surrounding it. From a cybersecurity spot in Gnosis, I think we house a lot of our customers' super sensitive data. I have talked about one of the examples of AI is pulling information out of commercial invoices and packing lists and putting information all into our system so that people can have full cost visibility and understanding where items are and things. And that's sensitive. There's information on purchase orders and things that, one company definitely doesn't want another company to see, and then definitely doesn't want anybody in the public eye to see. And then there's all these kind of things that are super secure and private. So us having top-notch security on our side to make sure that we have all the proper permissions and compliance regulations and all those kind of things in place is super important. And Brandon Toops, one of our engineers, we promoted him to VP of Infrastructure and Cybersecurity, and that's his full-time job, is making sure that we're all compliant and all these kind of things. He's done a fantastic job of just taking that on and doing that as a full-time job. And so that's one, and we've followed. There's great kind of frameworks in place. SOC 2 is the one that every software company hears about. We don't have to do a lot of the like GDPR, the personal data information, because we're not housing social security numbers or credit card numbers or any of that kind of stuff. So there's different levels of that. But it's sensitive, and it's important that we continuously maintain those top standards and make sure that when we work with the Fortune 10 brands in the world, that they can trust us with their information.
Yeah. I think if I was a purchasing person at as you said, a Fortune 10, but even if I think the Fortune 5,000, not the Fortune 500, the Fortune 5,000 are going to start looking at their logistics partners and say, prove to me that you are a worthy partner. And the reason I say that is because oftentimes in logistics, we have big companies connecting to the smallest companies, the mom and pop companies. And I think we have a tremendous challenge with all the trucking and drayage companies. Some are very small. We depend on owner operators in this business. And whether the drayage guys or the over the road, and anybody's connecting those to a Fortune 5,000 company, you're the conduit, but you also have to be the barrier. You got to make sure that we're doing that safely. I believe we more or less are, but the bar gets higher every damn day. I went to the NMFTA, National Motor Freight Transportation Association's cybersecurity conference last fall down in Cleveland. It was fantastic. And there was a guy from the federal government speaking, and he said, we're being attacked by three different groups. First, we have big countries. China's hacking all the time. So we have adversaries in the world called China is a frenemy. We do business. We want to get along, but there's hacking going on. And they say this is really ramped up in the logistics space. If, God forbid, somebody wanted to interrupt our way of life, we taught them how during COVID. We get very cranky if we can't get exactly our favorite food at the store or the toy or the piece of electronics that came on an ocean carrier. We have those nation states that are hacking. There's also these hacktivists who are always hacking into systems and to say, hey, stop using oil or stop being a capitalist, whatever they're doing that day. And then last but not least, we have companies that are groups of individuals getting increasingly sophisticated who are doing this, basically holding companies hostage, right? So they're saying, give us $500,000 and we'll leave your systems. And they're hacking in. And again, these are all getting much more sophisticated than they were in the past. You have a full-time guy doing that. There's full-time people trying to hack in. So you need that full-time. And I think we just all have to be looking at our daily hygiene when it comes to our systems.
That's right. And I know you mentioned you did a podcast with Sal recently, right?
Yes, Sal Mercaglia. I think it'll publish just before this one.
Perfect. Yeah, I was just saying. I know Sal is friends with Adam. I mentioned on our team and they work closely in initiatives and several. One of the things that FMC and the OSHA compliance and that stuff aside, a large push for the United States is to modernize infrastructure, because you think of hacks as stuff as like the Gnosis software getting hacked. It might make a BCO's life stink for a little while they can't see where their stuff is and do those kind of things. But a crane at a giant port getting hacked and going rogue is a whole different animal.
Transformers.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where the infrastructure and those kind of things, making it a national security priority to modernize our infrastructure. And that's in the, not just the physical piece, but the digital element of that infrastructure is something that's super important. And I know there's several people, Adam, Sal, and others included, that are pushing for that in Washington.
Yep. By the way, Sal is the guy who has the Sal Mercagliano. He is the what's going on with shipping guy who just exploded during COVID. I think he started his YouTube channel around there, and he is a maritime guy. He was on the ocean for many years, and then he's a history professor, and he is so knowledgeable of what's going on in shipping. I highly recommend that channel. He just flipped over 500,000 subscribers.
Wow,
so,
that's awesome.
Yeah, done fantastic. So the other side of security I want to talk to you about is not cybersecurity, it's cargo theft. Not so long ago, I talked to Danielle Spinelli on the podcast, and she was doing a webinar on with the CHIPS, the California Highway Patrol, on cargo theft, and not just regular cargo theft, sophisticated cargo theft, where there's these gangs tied to the cartels down in Mexico that are They're robbing ports and shipyards and trains. Anywhere where there's our freight, they're getting their mitts on it. And I know you guys don't make hardware, but you do track where containers are going. So talk about what you guys can do when it comes to this risk.
Sure. Yeah, you mentioned it. It's not our area of expertise is not so much at the individual containers being broken into and things like that. We recognize it after the fact and we're able to understand where your supply chain is. And then, of course, whenever incidents happen, as we can identify containers that might have been impacted, containers moving into those areas soon. And so giving our customers a macro level view of where that's happening and where their container flow is going just helps them understand risk. But it's something that we hear about all the time. There's companies whose entire focus is to drill down into when containers might be getting broken into and identify. And you mentioned some of your friends that are working on similar problems that are identifying when containers get opened or cut into, and there's light that hits sensors and those kind of things. It's all super interesting. And I think I mentioned before, there's a couple of the infrastructure providers in the space are turning to security agencies and things to monitor containers at these yards and places where
Oh
they're
yeah,
getting
you said
broken
like
into.
Pinkertons like patrolling
Exactly.
yards.
I know. And I couldn't remember the name, but it is Pinkerton. And there's all these security efforts being put in place because it's a real monetary problem. It impacts the bottom line for these companies that are moving freight, where you get something all the way from China to a couple miles from your facility and then it gets broken into and all the shoes or whatever gets stolen out of it. It's a huge
Yep.
deal.
And so push me back in the shallow end if I'm off base here, but companies like Bloodhound, who I know you guys are talking to, I talked to Dan Hendricks from Bloodhound on here. They can detect fentanyl in a container. They can detect human beings in a container. So I think that technology and our ability to detect what's in a container is going to get better and better. But they can also tell whether the door was opened, and also so there's all sorts of sensors that we're having. And I imagine those sensors are going to get better and better. And eventually they're going to be able to say, hey, this container's been breached. If their hardware, can you take data from, if somebody said, I have this ability, can you pull that into your data set?
For sure. Yeah. And we've talked to Bloodhound being a great example. I'm friends with Karnar at Tive, and we've done several integrations with those guys. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Overhaul. I'm friends with Mark Schrader at Overhaul and those guys. And that's their entire business is that piece. And that's the part that's parallel to what we do, and that it's the hardware, it's the actual container and the operations around it. We can tell our customers at a macro level where all their containers are and where all this stuff is. The data source that could be one of the data sources we pull. We have several customers that maybe they use one of these devices to track a trailer we track the container all the way to LA, but then it gets trucked to Chicago, wherever it is. If it's on the rail, we'll track it using the rail carrier. But if it's going in a transload or something and they want to use the sensor, we can tap into that data and incorporate it into our data model.
I have not talked to them about it yet, but I sent a note to Tive about they have a new seal that goes on the truck seal. And I think I know them, it is very high tech, and it is the seal right now that we have, it has a number on it, and it's an effective way, but I think it's probably going to tell us what's happening with that if somebody's cutting it or somebody is doing something with that seal. And it would be very interesting is if you said, okay, I opened the seal and then boom, data coming to your system.
That's right.
And then you're like, and then somebody says, whoa, why is my container opening 20 miles before my warehouse?
Exactly. Yeah, that's great. That's where we do our best job of aggregating data from all these different places. I'm at ocean carrier, port and terminal, and all the satellites, all the different stuff we've talked about. And so the individual hardware providers who do a great job at surfacing that whenever that stuff happens is a perfect addition and partnership for us to work with people like them.
Yeah. I did see you at Manifest. I also saw Dan Hendricks. I don't know. I know I introduced you guys. I don't know if you met at Manifest. Okay, good. And I'm intrigued by all of these new sensors that are popping up everywhere. And what I'm excited about is the tendency is for hardware to get cheaper and cheaper. And I'm really looking forward to a place where we say, yeah, every product we have at a certain price point has its own tracking. And then we say, yep, I just pulled into a port, into a dock, and it identified the 100 X boxes that I brought in and told me the serial numbers for each one. I'm looking forward
That's
to
right.
that day.
And that's where, and I think that is like you're painting your ideal, and I think my ideal is right in parallel to that in the future. Is if we right now can tell you what goes into a container from using AI to parse the commercial invoices and packing lists, and then we know where a container is from the time it gets loaded, or really a truck picks it up at origin and at end gates, gets loaded, might be a train shipment, goes to port of destination and might go on the rail. We can tell you all the way through to empty return. The part where we lose that last piece of visibility and we have to go integrate with third parties is when it leaves, when it gets on a truck and goes somewhere else. And so right now we have a lot of partners that we work with. I mentioned that we work with drayage carriers, as we have a good network of drayage carriers that we're integrated with their systems, that we can get those milestones away from ports. But then we're tracking the truck or relying on a third party to give us that information. When you get those hardware pieces on the container, that's that last piece of unknown of like, where is this container in real time after the last milestone that Gnosis has, that we can stitch that together. And we will have that true end-to-end visibility that you and I talked about earlier.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, we're talking about this is the order to cash. That's what the dream is. Everyone wants data from order to cash. And we have spots where we have really good data. And I think sometimes we're tracking a truck, sometimes we're tracking a trailer. Sorry, not trailer. Sometimes we have tracking for trailers like the guys like at BlackBerry. Then we have all the ELD makers inside of all the trailers. We're starting to see smarter containers that have actual sensors. And I think certain products have sensors inside the truck because this is our visibility is still like a puzzle we're putting together. There's still places where we don't have as much data, but I said this last time I interviewed you, Jake. If you're talking to Jake and say, what do you guys do today? It's going to be 30% better 6 months or a year from now, just because the things you guys are doing with connecting to new pieces of hardware and just making that data more and more insightful.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Joe. And that's something that, and since we're talking on the subject of that, first ocean carrier to talk about a lot of their containers having smart devices on it and being able to track it everywhere was Hapag-Lloyd. And so,
So they're a leader in this.
The partner that we already have and we're already working with is that. So the natural evolution of us tracking every single one of those and doing things. And when we get to where we're doing the demurrage piece now, the part that we're doing in the next couple of months after that is going to be detention on the way back. There's so many cool things you can do when you're tracking the individual container to automate gate transactions and understand when containers were outgated and empty returned, not based on relying on a third-party system, but actually having that sensor on the container. And that's exactly what we're working on. So that's a great sneak peek and tying this all together of the stuff that we're doing.
I love it. I love it. Jake, I'm going to summarize what we talked about, then I want you to get your final thoughts on this one. So I'm talking to my friend Jake Hoffman. We're talking about the container payment portal and the rise of AI in freight. And obviously, this is what Gnosis is up to. And by the way, we should spell Gnosis Gnosis.
Yes. See, I got right, my shirt
Gnosis
on
Freight is on your shirt. So anyone watching the video can see that. Yeah. What does Gnosis mean one more time? I know I asked this before.
So Gnosis is a Greek word, and it basically means to learn through experience or knowledge. Austin, our CEO, had a friend that was Greek growing up, and he became obsessed with some of the Greek culture and the way that he built the company and that we've continued to. I told the story of us having sticky notes and working as operators and those kind of things was to iterate the company based on what we learned. Don't go into a BCO or a drayage carrier or freight forwarder and tell them how to do business. They know how to do business. There's a reason that they have been the great people working in logistics for years and years. But for us to take that knowledge and then translate it back into the software, and that's our business model, and that's how we continue to work.
I love it. So let me summarize. So we talked first about this container payment portal, and that's really a partnership you guys have with PayCargo and Zim. When we had the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022, that's OSTRA 2022, they asked us, the FMC, Federal Maritime Commission, asked us to do better. and you guys are enabling people with data transparency and the integration to actually make this happen, because you're supposed to be compliant, but it's not easy to be compliant in this case because there's a lot of different data pieces, a lot of different integrations that weren't there And you guys have pulled all that together, making it much, much easier. A partnership with, again, PayCargo and Zim.
And Hapag-Lloyd is the other big ocean carrier on that. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we also talked about, very difficult to manage some of these compliance things, especially at the port. And we also talked about AI, and AI is now a clerk working at Gnosis. I suspect if I talk to you in 6 months from now, they might have been promoted already. But for now, they are the clerk that are taking data out of unstructured communications and putting it into structured communications and fields. The information's not that useful for us when it's in an attachment or an Excel or a PDF. Much better when Jake and the team puts it into a field. Then we talked about just the government inputs. You guys have a direct line to the federal government on this, which is super important because there are emerging threats and there is compliance that we're asking out of OSRA 2022 that people are still struggling with. I guarantee there are a fair number of people who say, yeah, we're compliant, but we're doing it with spreadsheets and scribbled notes on notepads in front of somebody's computer. And last but not least, we talked about security. First, cybersecurity, so important to the big companies it should be important to everyone, but let's face it, it's the biggest threat for the biggest companies. And then last but not least, we talked about cargo theft. Anyway, enough of my blather. Put a big old bow on this one, Jake Hoffman.
Thank you, Joe. I think that's a great summary there. And I think talking through all the different things is exciting. It's an exciting time at Gnosis. It's an exciting time in the industry. The container payment portal stuff is super exciting for us, gaining traction there. It's a departure from how we've always done things, where we've always approached it from the standpoint of the BCO. The way that we frame it when we're talking to everybody now is, instead of us kind of auditing and calculating and scraping data together, we are now the source of truth, which is a super exciting time for us. Whereas we're being compared to something in the past, we are now the source of truth that people will look to for how demurrage works and how per diem and detention works. So that's super exciting. On the AI front, we talked through one example about pickup number parsing. I briefly mentioned another, which is taking data out of commercial invoices and packing lists and arrival notices and all the information that lives in the periphery where it might exist in a document, but you need to take some action on it. You did a great job of saying it's of no use to you if it's in a document. The information exists, but you need it to be in a field. You need it to be in a database so that you can do something with it. And that's something that we're super excited about at Gnosis, is taking advantage of the continued rise of AI and how models are getting better and better. I mentioned it to you before we started recording. The plan for us is to continue to find use cases where this can help our customers automate tasks, take away that clerk work that you talked about. And we're going to stand on the shoulders of giants. We're going to lean into the models as they get better and better and AI continues to improve. And so the things that maybe are almost there with AI right now, I keep telling our engineering team to skate where the puck is going and to be ready for these models to get better and better, because something that may seem impossible right now is very possible in the near future.
I didn't ask this. I'm going to start asking everybody this. What's your favorite AI tool right now?
I use Cursor, which is a coding tool, which I know is if you're a developer out there, you may be familiar with it and use it. Cursor is what all of our engineers use, and props to our engineers. I try to do my best of always giving props to the people who make Gnosis run. It's definitely not me. I like to say I'm the dumbest one on the engineering team because those guys.
That is saying something. You're a Georgia Tech grad, man.
Those guys teach me something new. They teach me something new every day, and we have some super smart people that work here that we've fully embraced the Cursor and the other tools like that in the world. And that is where you can use a tool that uses any of the different models that you choose to help you write code and to help you do your daily tasks. And so you and I talked about, hey, are you using Grok or ChatGPT or Gemini or any of those? We find Claude Sonnet is the best for coding. ChatGPT is the best for just interacting day to day, and image generation. That's super important because all of our engineers change their Slack profile pictures every day, and AI generates something different. I think today we're being cowboys, so we'll see. And so there's all the different tools are good at different things, and we're just going to continue to ride on top of those models as they continue to get better and better.
Nice. So if somebody's listening and they say, "Hey, we're again," I'll let you run through who you work with.
Sure. Yeah, so our core customer is still and always will be the BCO, is the importer or the exporter. And that's where we help them aggregate the data around their international supply chain and then execute on it. We have BCOs that use us for international visibility, for drayage management, so making sure they send truckers to pick up containers on time, schedule deliveries, and those kind of things, for invoice auditing, for taking data out of the invoices and using AI to put it into a table and approve invoices and those kind of things. We have all these solutions that are tailored to BCOs to make their international freight lives easier and make their supply chains run smoothly. But then in doing so, we've developed this data model that we work with everyone. We have drayage carriers that use us for tracking containers and knowing when containers are available. And the beautiful thing that happens when you work with all these different parties in the international supply chain is you bring value to one and you have this great relationship with them that influences your relationship with the other. And so when we work with a BCO and a drayage carrier and both of them are our customers and we work with them somehow, why don't we just connect the dots and let them do business together and let this drayage carrier that we know and are best friends with deliver to this BCO that we know that they've never worked with.
Right. So if somebody's listening and they say, hey, I want to work with you guys, what does that implementation look like?
So for anybody just to track a container or to get onboarded in our system, we always say you're live in 24 hours. As you literally can send us a spreadsheet. You can send us a spreadsheet. You can send us anything that's like, hey, these are my container numbers and my bills of lading, and I want to see the PO number on there or whatever. And it's we using AI tools and using our engineers working super hard to continuously make things better. We give them value quick. And that's something that's a little bit nuanced and not really heard of in our international freight and software world. But then we always do onboarding with our engineers where they say, hey, what are the things you care about? You care a lot about demurrage in Los Angeles. Then we're going to build dashboards that show you those kind of things and configure the system over the first month to where you can see value super quickly and see the data, but then continuously discover new problems that you can solve in working with Gnosis together.
Very nice. Very nice. I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to your website. I will also put a link to the interview I did with our friend Lauren Began about Astra 2022 and any other links you and your marketing team give me. I'll put those in the show notes. So what conferences will we see you and the fine folks from Gnosis at?
We're doing a good conference tour this year. Obviously, TPM was earlier this year at the end of February and early March. We did an RV across the country and had a tailgate at TPM, which was super exciting and a lot of fun. If anybody's listening and hasn't seen that, I think we have an actual documentary video that we
give it to me and I'll put it in the show notes.
I don't think it's actually even been released yet, but you'll be one of the first people to see it. I promise. I'll send it to you. It's great. So we did that. We'll be at, I think AgTC is coming up in a couple of weeks for the agricultural exporters that meet in Seattle, Tacoma every year. There was just a Gartner conference. There's the JOC Inland Conference, which is the more inland focused version of TPM that the JOC puts on every fall. You and I were together at Manifest. So the conference tour continues. There will be many more places where Gnosis people will continue to be out and about.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. Jake, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yep. Thank you, Joe. Always a pleasure to be here and good talking to you.
Yep. And thank all of you for listening to my podcast. Your support's very much appreciated. Until next time, onward and upward. You have been listening to the Logistics of Logistics podcast, where we engage with leaders in the logistics and supply chain community. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave us a nice review on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you listen. Also, please check out our videos on YouTube and connect with us on LinkedIn. We're very big on LinkedIn. And you can also reach us on the logisticsoflogistics.com, our website.